Janome.
Hi everybody, welcome back to month 2 of the Janome Block of the Month Blitz quilt. We're here in my studio. Cheeto's here, Mr. Kim is here. We just want to welcome you into the studio and make you feel right at home. We are having so much fun having you join us. And it was great. After the first month's class, I heard from so many of you. You all are participating, joining in. There were even a lot of groups that were formed through the dealers who are meeting at the dealers for a class and following right along. And I had so much fun seeing the pictures that you shared. Some of you are even having your favorite pets join in. We saw some puppy dogs and some kitty cats. It's really great to see what you're doing and how you're joining in to just be part of this. So we're thrilled that you're here and we want to make you feel right at home. Now, this is a skill building quilt and we're going to be making 3 blocks today. Block A is this one right here with just some squares and rectangles. Easy, right? We're going to start off easy, and with each consecutive block, it's going to get a tiny bit harder. So that's the way you're going to grow your piecing skills, and I've got tons of tips and tricks along the way to share with you. Block B is the green one right down there on the end, and block C for today is the green one right up there in the corner. So those are the blocks we're making today. You're going to want to go to the Janome website. Just follow the link that we have posted and print out your handouts for this month, month 2, and it's got all your cutting instructions and the pressing instructions, but mostly you're going to follow along with me. I'm going to walk you through every step of the process, and we're going to have fun together doing it. So, are you ready to dive in? Come on over. So for block A, we're going to be cutting our fabrics. And here's what you're going to need. You're going to need a 2.5-inch strip of your background. Whatever that is that you're using, get a 2.5-inch strip of that. Then you're going to need a 2.5-inch strip of the lavender. If you're following along with the solidish colors, you'll need your 2.5-inch strip of your lavender. And then remember, after last month, we had those pieces left over of the grape and the violet. You're going to need to pull those out because we're going to need to cut some squares from those. And finally, you're going to need a strip of your royal, 1 2.5-inch strip of your sapphire, and 1 of the pansy. So those are the fabrics that we're going to need to do our cutting. Now, right up front, you're going to need to choose either the Precision Pre-Cut ruler, which is the square ruler. It's 10.5 inches and looks just like this. Or you can use the Jelly Roll ruler, the Precision Jelly Roll ruler, which is the smaller ruler and looks just like this. I'm going to put it on some white paper so you can see that all of the 1/8-inch markings are not there, because when you're working with pre-cuts, you really never cut 1/8-inch increments. You only cut quarter, half, and whole size increments. So pick one of those rulers, whatever one's handy or whichever one is easier for you to grab right now. That's what we're going to use. I'm going to use the Jelly Roll, and we're going to get started on cutting exactly as shown on our handouts. So come on in. So if you're following along on the cutting instructions, the chart is right here. I have a strip of my background fabric, a 2.5-inch strip of my background fabric laid out, and it's wrong sides together. Now, you probably want to cut 2 pieces at a time. It's just easier and it goes quicker, and that's perfectly okay. If you're right-handed, your strips are going to lay with the bulk of the fabric out to the right, and you're going to be cutting from left to right, just like you read from left to right. That's how you're going to cut. Now, if you're a lefty, you're probably going to want to flip it the other way or have the strip going straight out away from you and then using your left hand to cut in front of your body. So, but for all you right-handers, go ahead and lay your strip out, fold it in half, and the first thing we're going to do is just take off that selvage edge, and we're going to hold the ruler and take this off, and this is something you either throw in your scrap bag or put aside. But the first bullet says cut 2 2.5-inch squares. So we're going to lay the jelly roll ruler or the precision pre-cuts ruler down, and you can see right here what we want to do is cover the raw edge of the fabric strip with the mint green lines. What you don't want to see is you don't want to see fabric coming out to the left of the line, or you don't want to see fabric sticking out down here. Once the raw edges are underneath those mint green lines where it says 2.5, you want to go ahead and cut. And that's the way you know that you're cutting 100% accurately. And these perfect, cute little 2.5 inch squares. The next thing we need to cut are 2.5 by 4.5 inch rectangles. So we lay the jelly roll ruler out just like this. We're going to again line up the 2.5 inch line on the bottom of the strip, and you can see the 2.5 right there. Now we go looking for the 4.5 inches. Here's the 4 inch line. Here's the 1/2 inch beyond the 4, and that way we know we are cutting 2.5 by 4.5 inch rectangles. So go ahead and cut that. All right, now our background fabric is done for block A. You can put that aside. And the next thing we want is from the violet, grape, and lavender, we're going to need 2.5 inch squares. So what I'm going to have you do with these is put these together. Here's my grape. And I'm going to line these up. Again, these were the leftover bits after we did the pre-cutting and sewing of our star points. And we're going to go ahead and cut 2.5 inch squares. There's my 2.5 inch lines from the grape. Set this aside. We do not throw this away. We are still going to need this fabric for later. And the same thing for the violet, which is the dark purple. Go ahead and line these pieces up. I like to use the lines on my mat and in conjunction with the lines on my ruler. It's like measuring twice, cutting once, just like Grandma used to tell you. All right, here we go. There's our 2.5 inch squares. Set those remaining pieces aside. And here's our lavender. And I haven't cut anything from this strip yet. So what I want to do is just cut off the selvage edges. So we have a nice crisp cut here, and we're going to line that up and cut 2.5 inch squares from this. There we go. Now our purples are all cut. And we do the same thing for the blues, except we only need one sapphire, which is the medium of the blues. We need one sapphire square and we need one royal square. So I'm just doing one layer of each of those colors, but I'm stacking them up. I'm going to cut off the selvage edge. Okay. And then we're going to cut one square from the sapphire and the royal. All right, here we go. See that? And then we need to cut 2 from pansy. Pansy is kind of like a periwinkle color. It's probably my favorite color in the grouping, but I love them all. I really do. So again, cut off the selvage edges. And this time we're going to cut 2 2.5 inch squares. And that's it. Now we're ready to take all these squares and our 2 rectangles over to the sewing machine, and we're going to sew them together into 4 patch units. So what you can see with block A is really, it's kind of like a giant 4 patch because there's 4 quadrants. And we've got the quadrant, 2 of the quadrants with the lavender and the background fabric. And we're going to focus on those first. So the first thing you're going to do is take a lavender square and sew it to a background fabric square, one of those 2.5 inch squares, just line them up. Now, hopefully you tested your 1/4 inch seam allowance and you've got that perfect 1/4 inch, scant 1/4 inch seam allowance all ready to go. And no matter what foot you're using, I hope that you've tested that out and that you're ready. But I'm using my HP foot and plate on my M7. And here we go. Now, what you want to do with these two patch units is we want to go press. And this time we are actually going to press these toward the background fabric. I know that kind of goes against what you might think the seam should be, but really we want this pressed to the background fabric. So I'm going to do that and I'll be right back. I've pressed my seam and the seam allowance is going this way towards the background fabric, and I did that on both of my 2-patch units. And now we're ready to add the 2.5 by 4.5 inch background fabric rectangle on top of these 2-patch units. The only thing you need to be careful is to make sure to align them exactly as shown right here so that the orientation of the lavender is in the right place. So here you see I have the lavender square and then the background square, and we've got the background fabric on top. And really, both of them are exactly the same. We just spun one around. So go ahead and line them up like this next to your machine. Put the rectangles on top and go ahead and stitch these together. Here we go. It's a good idea to control the speed of your stitching and not go super fast. I have mine right about halfway. My little speed lever there is right about halfway because I want control. And that's really what precision piecing is all about. Now see, because that scant 1/4 inch is exactly perfect, my little rectangles line up perfectly because we cut perfectly, we've been sewing perfectly, and they should just line up beautifully. Go ahead and line up the raw edges, sew these down, and then we're going to press toward the rectangles. So now our little units are done. They're actually 3 patches because we have the 1 rectangle and 2 of the squares. And you'll notice that the seam is pressed nice and flat towards the rectangle unit. And you should have 2 of those. These measure 4.5 inches unfinished. Just set them aside for the moment and we'll come back to those. Now what you're going to do, I'm going to show you a really great pressing tip for making 4 patches. And it has to do with the way that you line up your units to begin sewing them. So what I've done is I've laid out my units and I have the sapphire in the top left and the pansy in the top right position. Then I have a pansy in the bottom left and the royal in the bottom right position. Here's how I've laid out my violets and grapes. I have a violet and then a grape and then a grape and a violet. And if you lay out your units just like that and pick them up like I do, you're going to see some magic happen at the iron when we press so that we can sew these 4 patches without a pin and get a perfect point. This is a great, great technique and I love sharing it with people. So the first thing I want you to do is start with the grape and put it right sides together on top of the violet like this, and then sew that unit with a perfect scant 1/4 inch. And then take a few stitches off and don't break the stitch chain. Now pick up the violet and put it right sides together on the grape. And we're going to put that under the presser foot. Now, if your Janome machine, like mine, has this automatic presser foot lifter or the hover feature, make sure and have it engaged. Mine turns yellow when it's engaged. And that means that every time I stop, the presser foot's going to raise by itself. But the needle is going to stay down into the bobbin area, which means I can push my little units right up to the needle and it will stop. And then when I touch my foot pedal, or you were to use your stop start button, it would start sewing and the first bite of the needle goes right into the fabrics. Okay, now it's all right to use your scissors or your thread cutter and go ahead and cut these apart. Now you'll see that they are chained together. There's that little chain of threads there. And this is going to be really handy when we go to the ironing board and I show you how to press these. But let's do the blues next. Let's start by taking the top pansy and putting it right sides together on the sapphire color square. And we're going to go ahead and sew those. And leave that little chain about 6 stitches. No, it's not exactly 6, but about 6 stitches in between our little square units here, our 2-patch units. And we're going to go ahead and sew this. Perfect. And now you've got your little 4 patches, your 2 patches sewn together so that we can create 4 patches. But we need to go to the iron now, and I need to show you which way to press these seams. So when you get to your pressing surface or your ironing board, you want to lay these units out so that the stitching is horizontal to you. You don't want to do it so it's vertically to your body. You want to do it so it's horizontally to you. And what's going to happen is you're going to find that you'll either have the royal or the grape on top on the right-hand side. This is really important, and this is the pressing technique that I have figured out so that you can get these beautiful points in your 4 patches without any pins. So the first thing you need to do is go ahead and set your seam by pressing the seam that you just sewed closed first. You can hit it with some steam if you want. I like steam. Steam is our friend, but even if you don't, you want to make sure and you want to set the seam because that makes the stitches just sink down into the fibers of your units. Then we're going to put our finger in here and we're going to just push the violet away from us and use the tip of our iron to push that seam towards the violet, and then just make sure it stays nice and pressed and flat. So the seam is going away from my body and towards the violet. Then we're going to take this unit and we're going to flip it up away from us. And now we're going to open it so that we're bringing the violet towards us. The seam again is going towards the violet. And we want to make sure that we press that nice and flat. And now what's going to happen, here's the magic. Where the little thread is, that's the side we're going to stitch at the machine. We're going to put this right sides together and we're going to carry this back to the machine. Set it aside. Let's do the blues. Let's press the royal away from the pansy color. And let's flip this unit away from our body and bring the sapphire down towards us away from the pansy and give it a nice press. Make sure it's nice and flat. And here again, where the threads are, that's where we're going to be stitching. So let's put these right sides together and we're going to go back to the machine. Now here's where the magic happens. You're going to love this. Because we pressed our seam allowances in those exact positions or orientations, now when we get to the sewing machine, we're going to put these units under the presser foot so that the seam allowance is facing toward the presser foot, which kind of seems counterintuitive to what you want to do because you probably are thinking, oh, that seam is going to get flipped back over, but you be the boss. Don't let it get flipped back over. We are going to make sure that the seam goes under the presser foot. And what happens is the feed dogs and the presser foot itself with the feed dogs, smash that point together. If you had it flipped the other way and the seam allowance was facing towards you and away from the presser foot, what would happen is the point would just pull away just a tiny little bit and it wouldn't be crisp. So we want a really crisp point here. And this is where the magic happens. So come in and see. So now we have these units right sides together, but it's very important that you make sure that these opposing seams are snuggled close together. So how it should feel is if you have this seam aligned beautifully with the seam underneath, is that it should feel sort of like a closed zipper would feel if you ran your finger over it. If it's not lined up, it'll feel lumpy and bumpy and you'll know something is wrong. So what we're going to do is keep your stiletto or your stylus handy, and we want to make sure that this seam allowance does not flip over this way. We want to make sure that it goes under the presser foot. So we're going to go ahead and sew our scant 1/4 inch. See how I made sure that that seam allowance stayed tucked right in here? Now you just let the presser foot and the feed dogs do all the work. You just guide it. And are you ready for Christmas morning? If you've never done this technique, you are going to be doing the Christmas dance. Look at that perfect point. It just doesn't get any better than that. So let's do it again with our purple units. Again, align these up so that the opposing seams here, they're going away from each other, are snuggled together. And when you run your finger over it, it feels real nice and smooth like a closed zipper. And then go ahead, line up your raw edges, use your stiletto or your stylus or the points of your scissors, and make sure that this seam allowance does not flip backwards. And go ahead and sew right over it. And another Christmas morning right here when you see these beautiful, beautiful 4-patch points. They are just perfect. All right, so now at this point, you can either press these seams to one side or you can press them open. I kind of like pressing them to one side. The pressing arrows are right on your handout. Let's go ahead and press them to one side, and then we're going to come back and sew the block together. So now we've made all of our 4 quadrants, and we're ready to sew our block together. And again, this is just like a giant 4-patch because there's 4 pieces that we have to sew together. So we've laid it out. I've laid it out exactly as shown here. Just make yours mimic the handout. And then what we're going to do is take the top right, flip it over to the top left, and we're going to snuggle those seams right there. See that? We're going to make sure those snuggle because that has to be a nice point. And we're going to bring this down and we're going to sew this seam. Now here, there's no way to control the seam allowance. It's going to be going away from the presser foot, but that's just how it has to be for right now. You can't always get that same technique where we have it facing towards the presser foot. And here, we're going to do the same thing here. We're going to fold this over right sides together, line these up, and we're going to go ahead and stitch these. Line up the edges as best you can and go ahead and stitch. There we go. And now we're going to go to the iron and do basically the same thing. We're going to press the seam this way, and then we're going to take our unit and press the other seam toward us. All right, and so then when we have our center point, we are going to have that seam allowance facing the correct direction. So go ahead and get those pressed and come back here and we'll sew these together. So now we've sewed our 2-patch units together. The seam is now pressed towards the background and lavender units on both of them. You can see I still got a really perfect point there. And now we're going to take the 2 pieces where we have the adjoining threads and put them right sides together. And we're going to line these up and we're going to stitch this long edge. Again, make sure that these seams in the middle are nice and tight and opposing each other. And then line up your other seams as best you can and go ahead and stitch. Whoops. Let's go ahead and make sure you stop and tuck under that seam allowance. See, it happens to everybody, but I made sure I stopped in time. And now we're going to hit right in the center, realign the last 2 opposing seams. And sew all the way to the end. There you go. Cut your threads and let's check that center point. Perfect. Yay. It's perfection. So now we're going to go ahead and press that, and then we're moving on to block B. Congratulations, you just finished block A, and I'm super proud of you. So you finished block A. Now we're ready to move on to squares and half square triangles. Now we're going to bring in the precision flying geese and half square triangle ruler because we're going to be using side B of the ruler to make half square triangles from those 2.5-inch strips. So you're going to want to follow along with your handouts. But first, let's just talk a little bit about the flying geese and half square triangle ruler. I've got my little white page here so you can see easily. Side A is in the magenta, the pink, and we're not going to be using that today at all. The only thing we're going to be using today is side B of the ruler. And if you turn it upside down, you will see all the mint green words and numbers, and they're all facing you. Remember, for today only, we are going to be making half square triangles, no flying geese today, and we just want to use side B of the ruler. So what we're going to be doing is looking for that 2.5 inch marking on side B. It's the second line down, and we're going to be lining that up with our strips. So the first thing let's do is let's go cut in order as shown right on your handouts. Okay, we've got a photo bomb here, everyone. Cheeto and Remy kind of hopped up on the cutting table just to say hi to everybody. You know, Remy is Cheeto's protege. So anyway, let's get back to our cutting for block B. Let's go right down and cut the bullets as listed. The first thing we need are 4 2.5 inch squares. Now, this is my leftover strip that I used from the first block we did today, and I'm going to go ahead and cut 2 at a time, and we're going to cut 2 squares and then another 2 squares. This can go pretty fast, actually. All right, now we're going to need some side B triangles. That means with the Precision Flying Geese ruler, we are going to use side B of the ruler, and what we need are, it says 4 2.5 inch side B triangles. So here's the 2.5 inch line right on the bottom of the strip unit. The little flat edge at the top lines up on the top of the strip unit, and we're going to go ahead and hold our ruler in place and go ahead and cut. There's 2 of our triangles, and then we're going to rotate the ruler 180 degrees away from you. So now the point is completely going away from your body. Line this up on the last diagonally cut edge. Hold it with your pinky. Remember the pinky trick? And we have 2 more little triangles. So that's all we need from our background fabric. Now let's move on to Emerald and Lagoon. And Emerald and Lagoon, here's my Emerald and the Lagoon. We're going to cut 2 at a time. And we're going to just kind of lop off those little selvage edges here. Make sure we have a nice crisp cut. Get rid of the selvage edges, and we're going to cut from the Emerald and Lagoon 2 2.5 inch squares. So I'm going to line that up. That's all I need from the Emerald. Let's do our Lagoon. And we'll go ahead and trim off those selvage edges and cut 2 2.5 inch squares. Just so you know, I just made the basket twice with those selvage edges, which is something I almost never do. So it must be my lucky day. Now we have our squares cut from Emerald and Lagoon. Now we're going to move on to Citrus and Mint. And here we just need some side B triangles. So we're going to lay these out. Again, these are 2 layers at a time. And you want to make sure you get all of the selvage edge off of each one. We wanted to make sure we did that on the back, got rid of the selvage edges. I bet I can't make it 3 times. Nope, I didn't. That's all right. So now we're going to take our side B of the ruler, and we're going to line it up on the 2.5 inch line, hold it in place, and cut 2 triangles. And now we're going to do the same thing with the mint. All right. And go ahead and trim your selvages. And, oh, that time I made the basket. So nobody has to come in along behind me and pick up much. Actually, it's me. Okay, now we have those triangles. And the last thing we need to cut is seaweed. And we need 8 2.5 inch side B triangles. So go ahead and trim off the selvage edge. And now, again, we're cutting 2 layers at a time. So we're going to make 4 cuts. Here's the first 2, Actually, Mr. Kim is being so sweet. He's picking up those pieces. Rotate the ruler, line it up on the last diagonally cut edge, hold it in place, lock it in with your pinky on the mat, and then we're going to move this little strip over and make 2 more cuts, because again, we need 4 cuts of 2 layers to get 8 triangles. Okay. And then our cutting for block B is done. So let's meet over at the sewing machine and we'll put this block together. So now we're ready to match up our little triangles to create our half square triangles. So start with your seaweed, which is the dark green, and your background fabric. When you take these apart, you'll notice that they're literally mirror images of each other. So you're going to want to lay them out and match them up with the flat top of the background fabrics with the flat top of your seaweed. So now I've put these together so that they match up right sides together. Can you see that? All right, so that's one set already together. I already did 2 others here. Let's put this set together. These are going to be half square triangles. So let's go ahead and sew these together, and then we'll come back and address the rest of them. What you're going to do, it doesn't matter if you feed the point through first or if you start at the flat top. What's important is that you make sure that you go all the way to the tip here of that flat top, whether you're starting there or you're ending here. People tend to veer off before they get to that point if they're ending with it, and you need to make sure that when you're stitching, your needle goes right in at that point. Okay, now go ahead and stitch. Whatever you do, don't tug or pull on these edges, because they are bias edges, and we want to make sure that we're letting the presser foot and the feed dogs do all the work. And then you can literally chain piece these. I kind of like to put the points in first because it allows me to guide exactly where my seam is going to come out. I'm really aiming for the tip of that flat top edge, and I want my needle to finish right at that point. But again, the mechanics of this are such that you could start at the flat top edge, and if that's what feels more comfortable to you, then by all means, do it that way. But go ahead and sew all 4 of those half square triangles. There you go. And now we're going to go ahead and press these all towards the green, the dark green. And we're going to make sure that the seams are pressed nice and flat first, and then we're going to press the seams toward the green. All right, so go ahead and get that done, and we'll come back here and sew the rest. Now, wasn't that easy? I love making half square triangles this way because there's no wasted fabric, and you're only left with 1 little dog ear. Now let's talk about those dog ears, all right? I am the self-appointed dog ear police. No, seriously, if you want to improve your precision piecing, the dog ears have to go. Now you can either trim these by using your jelly roll ruler or your precision pre-cuts ruler, or if you think that you've been really accurate and you kind of give them a measure. I've got a little measuring tool right here on my the bed of my machine, and yep, it's really good, 2.5 inches. So what you can do is you can just lop these off with some scissors as you sit right there and just trim everything off, because here's the thing, and this is my own quote, you may have heard it. Dog ears are the cellulite of quilting. They just create lumps and bumps in your seams where you don't want them. So it's time now to trim off the dog ears and make sure that your little half square triangles are just squared up perfectly. So I want you to take a moment to do that. And then we're going to go ahead and take our citrus color and match them up with 2 of our seaweed colors and your mint, 2 mint and 2 seaweeds. We're going to create 4 more half square triangles, and then we also need to sew the squares to our background squares. So I want you to get all that done, everything trimmed, and then we're going to meet back and put it all together. Hi everyone, this is Miss Tater. We call her Miss Sweet Tater, and she's kind of shy. She's a little skittish, but boy, we sure love her, and she decided to make an appearance in the studio today too. She came over by herself, but now she's decided she's going to move on and find something else to explore. All right, so hopefully you got all of your half square triangles made and all of those dog ears trimmed. And now you're going to follow the little chart right on your handouts and lay your unit out and make sure you've checked it so that everything is in order. And don't be discouraged if you happen to sew a piece wrong. It happens to everyone, and it doesn't take long to rip it out and make it right. All right, so I'm very fortunate I have Mr. Kim to do that when he's home. But lay everything out, and now let's talk about how we're going to assemble this block. There's different ways you could do it, but I find it works really well, again, to assemble this like a large 4-patch. So you've got 4 quadrants, and I've just sort of split the block up, and I'm going to work on sewing these half square triangles together just as they are. We're going to stop and press. Be sure and follow the direction of the arrows on your handout and create your 4 quadrants, and then we're going to put the block together just like we did with the last one. It's like a giant 4-patch. So go ahead, let's sew our half square triangles together, then sew our little 2-patch square units to those half square triangles. Let's get this all put together. So once you have all of these sewn together, these half square triangles, make sure and press the seam as shown on your handout, and then let's go ahead and sew these together to make our little 4-patch quadrants. Okay, we've done some serious sewing on these little units. Now make sure you've got everything pressed exactly as shown by the red arrows. I know it seems a little confusing on those handouts, but just follow them one at a time. Just be careful as you go, because this will make sewing these units together so much better, because we'll have opposing seams where we need them. Also, you should have these 1/4-inch seam allowances left over on each of your quadrants, and we're going to want to make sure that we stitch so that we catch the needle right at the intersection there, and that will give us some perfect points. So let's go ahead and sew these together like our giant 4-patch. Again, we've sewn these together just like a giant 4-patch. Make sure you take the side that's on the left, flip it away from you, and we're going to press the seam on your right-hand side up towards the unit on the top, and the one that's on the left side, we're going to bring towards your body and press the seam down. That way, we're going to get a perfect point in the center again, and that's what we really want. Okay, last seam for block B. We're almost there. Now, you're going to want to just make sure that your seams are all snuggling and opposing each other so that you can get that perfect point. If you want to pin, you absolutely can use pins. I kind of like not using pins. The more you do this and the more you work on your precision piecing skills, the less you're going to need pins, because sometimes pins can distort. So let's go ahead and try the snuggling method and see if we can get a perfect center here. And we're going to just kind of go slow, and I'm always feeling with my fingers to make sure that all these little seams are opposing each other, and I'm lining up that center so that I've got that perfect point. This may take a little practice, but you will get it, and just go slow. And once you get past the center, realign the rest of your seam and sew the rest of the seam all the way down. There you go. Let's see how I did. Ooh, that's a nice point. Now, it may take a little practice to do this, but trust me, this is a great method for really improving your piecing skills so that you will start getting these points, especially when you have diagonal angles. So we're done with block B. It's time to work on block C. You are making such great progress. We're almost done. Now we're going to work on block C. It's another one with those pretty greens. And again, this was just because I did the blocks in order of their difficulty. And this isn't really any more difficult than the last one. It's just a combination of squares and half square triangles. So be sure and follow along on your handouts for block C. You're going to need a strip of your background fabric. Now, if you were using one strip, of your background fabric, this is all you'd have left, about this much. And we're going to need 12 side B triangles from this 2.5-inch strip, but you can't get 12 out of this. So you may have to dig into your stash and come up with another strip, which is great. You're going to need your emerald and seaweed. For that, we're going to need 2 2.5-inch squares from those colors and 2 2.5-inch side B triangles. And then finally, from your citrus, lime, mint, and lagoon, you're just going to need 2 2.5-inch side B triangles. So, through the magic of video, I'm going to go ahead and cut these. You get yours cut, and then we'll meet over at the sewing machine. The quality control manager is here to make sure I'm doing it right. Okay, so you're going to want to set your 4 squares aside for now. Just put them aside and focus on all these beautiful little triangles. What we're going to do is we're going to match all of the colored solidish triangles up with our background fabric triangles, and we're going to sew them together to make half square triangles. Then simply follow the diagram, the pressing diagram on page 2, and press all of your seams as shown by the red arrows. And then meet back here, and we're going to put the block together. Now you've seen me actually doing a lot of my trimming of the dog ears right at the machine with my scissors. But I wanted to pop in here with a top tip for you. And this is for those of you who may not be completely accurate with making your half square triangles right up front. You could easily take a few moments to use your precision precuts or your precision jelly roll ruler and just trim these up with your ruler. And it's not that many. There was just 12, remember? So if you're not really accurate with your cutting and sewing yet, this is a good tip to help with having your block go together nice and smoothly. So you would just lay the ruler down on top of the unit and align the 45-degree line up on top of the seam. And then you could take off anything that's left. And all I really have here is that dog ear, because I'm pretty accurate. But again, in the beginning, it might not hurt to go ahead and give this a try, just so you can see if there's any extra, you want to trim it off, okay? So go ahead and do that either with your scissors, snip off those dog ears, or use your ruler and your rotary cutter and make these nice and perfectly 2.5 inches unfinished. You'll be really glad you did when we go to put the block together. Come on, bud. Come on. Don't get on my block. All right, everybody. So I've laid out all my pieces, all right? And just follow along. We're going to do this in 4 quadrants again, because it really is easier to put the block together if you make your little 4-patch units and then you sew the big 4-patch. So follow along right with your handout and make sure that you've laid everything out. And then go ahead and sew the units together. I'd start with the square and the half square triangles in each, and then the 2 half square triangles. Make sure when you put them right sides together, you pick them up and get them over to the machine in the orientation that they need to be sewn. Don't be discouraged if you flip one around. It happens to the best of us, or we have our little furry helpers helping us along in our studio, and things get shifted around. But go ahead, sew these together, and we'll get all of these units done, and then we'll sew the block together, and you'll be done with month 2. We have our 4 quadrants all sewn and pressed. They should measure 4.5 inches unfinished. If they're too small or too big, you may need to do a little adjusting, but as we go along and as you get more comfortable sewing with your 1/4 inch seam allowance, it will become so much easier to do this. So now all we have to do is put our block together, and that's, as you know, pretty darn easy and fun. So line these up. Again, we're just making a big 4-patch, and make sure your seams snuggle when you can. And let's go ahead and finish this block. Okay. We're going to take this over to the ironing board and get these seams pressed, just like we've been doing all day, and then we'll do the final seam. Here we go. Ah, it's perfect. Wonderful. So you're just going to press this last seam, and then we're going to finish up the class. We did it. We finished blocks A, B, and C. And I hope you had as much fun just sewing along with me as I did, envisioning you joining along and sewing your blocks wherever you are. I hope if you feel so inclined, you might drop a little note, post it on the Janome Sewing Machines page on Facebook, or the Janome Sewing Classroom. Post pictures of your group, your little sewing bee, whatever, or even if you're just by yourself, post what you did. Show us your blocks. I want to see what you're doing and if you are feeling empowered with your precision piecing. So next month, we're going to tackle D, E, and F, and we're going to learn more things and have a lot of fun, as we always do here in the studio. So thank you from Cheeto and me and Mr. Kim. And we've had a great time today, and I'm just feeling so blessed that you joined us. Have fun sewing. I hope to hear from you or see your posts on the Janome Sewing Classroom page. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.